The focus of this panel is if we're doing so well, I started as an optimist, I started the summit with areas that we've gained real progress in. And I think the last speakers have demonstrated some of that progress, and the contributions to the field, we continue to progress. But the question is, if we're doing so well, why are we doing so poorly? I would argue this has to do with this concept of pace, the pace of change against the pace of progress. I still, though, as an optimist, believe there's lots of opportunities available to us in the innovation that we're seeing. And we want to explore that, but we want to take a very critical look at where are we still falling down, why is that happening, and that's going to be the focus of our panel. The format today will be, I'm going to give each one of our speakers 3 minutes of opening comments or remarks. It's their observations as to where we are getting progress, but what's holding us back, where the challenges might lie. Then we're going to go into direct panel interaction between the audience. So I want to see those yellow cards coming up to me over here. And we're going to also have questions for each other. We really want to kind of test the limits, if you will. It's going to be fast-paced. If we get lots of questions, we're going to kind of go into lightning round, if you will. So really short answers. And then I want to give each one of our guests up here 2 minutes for closing remarks, so they can kind of capstone what their conversation up here is all about. So please be involved. It's interactive, so bring those cards up to me, and we'll get started. Art, 3 minutes.
3 minutes. There's no countdown timer. How am I going to know?
Oh, yes, there is. Look at just along the lady right here in the front. We'll give you your 3 minute
the best
countdown.
part is she's in the dark, see, so we don't see any of those people now.
And you forgot your glasses.
That's
okay.
Right. So the main thing I see that's missing is, I agree with your idea that the pace is different. The pace of offense versus the pace of defense, the pace of change, the pace of, oh wait, we don't change anything in this space until it's really old. But more importantly, I think we're missing it's not monolithic. It's not all about engineering. Yes, I are an engineer, and I can spell it, and IT. Oh wait, OT. So the problem becomes one, if we look at it from an engineering perspective, we forget about management, we forget about policies and procedures, it doesn't take that long to change a router. I mean, you literally have to pull some plugs, put a new one in, so when the old one smoke leaves, you can put a new one in. Try changing the policies in your company for doing something. Try changing the regulations. And I just finished a session up in DC last week where they're talking about what would happen if we had to change one line of code in every 737? There are only 9,000 737s roughly flying right now, so how long would it take to change the code? How long would it take to test the code per the current regulations, or to change the regulations so we could actually put them back in the air before they all expired being too old? And so a big part of our problem is we've created very long, difficult pipelines for regulations and change on the paperwork policy side, and so we haven't looked at those. And so when we discover that piece of code that grounds every 737, Southwest Airlines will either have 2 choices: buy a totally new fleet, because there's no way they can run through the current change process mandated by FAA, all these other regulations, their own internal regulations, to fix one line of code on all their airframes. And so that's something that's holding us back as an industry now, is the lack of paying attention to anything besides the ones and zeros, how much crypto I need, the true engineering. It's let's put it into operation. And I actually when Adam said his first thing was to make it easy to implement, I just went, thank you, because that's, I think, a missing piece.
Very good. We're going to turn it over to Rob, which is really interesting because, Rob, you're the fleet guy, right? So you're going to talk to me about the opportunity in your opening comments. What does it mean to manage a fleet, and what opportunities are hidden in there? I mean, Art brings up a great point about trying to deal with this. He's talking about fleets of airplanes. Let's talk about the things that make airplanes go through the sky, fleets of turbines.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So I'm fairly new in my role, about 18 months. Came out of pretty much minted in Silicon Valley. Comfortable with platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, secure development of applications, those kind of things. What's exciting about this is when I first got into my role, what do? You try to understand the problems that your customers face. In 2016, we launched over 50 what we called security health checks globally on thermal fleets and sites. And we began to see a real pattern. Much of it also lined up with findings from the Department of Homeland Security and ICS-CERT, which was another interesting coincidence. And the findings were this: we weren't doing intrusive testing. It was more or less an audit of what hardware, what software do you have in place, what sort of access control definitions are on your edge perimeter. Really fundamental stuff, or at least people in security would think is pretty fundamental. And we found a lot of really simple opportunities to make improvements, whether it was the instrumentation of tools or services to help out. And then the thinking too was, because we're also at GE going to market with some products which are, arguably very good at what they do, but they're also very expensive. And so there was this barrier, I call it the cost to value ratio, where customers were looking at what we were offering and they just couldn't get their heads around things. So we saw an opportunity, instead of coming in one time heavy-handed and saying, look, here's how you do security, let's break it down and focus on a critical security controls approach and a capability maturity model, which we felt really resonated and customers seemed to be agreeing with us. And it's just this idea of, if you begin to implement controls, it's not an all or nothing proposition, you begin to implement controls, you dramatically make an attacker's job much harder. And at the end of the day, I think that's the goal we need to have in mind, is how do you create frustration, difficulty, and challenge for those who want to compromise our systems. Much of it can be the implementation of some pretty fundamental controls. You can grow your platform from there.
Tyler, you're in an exciting new role. You're looking at the application of technologies as a disruption for business models and opportunity to grow whole new productivity lines and make businesses more efficient.
Yeah, let me try and tie that in to the question about what we're doing wrong. And I think I was calculating out there in the hall, this is my 7th summit. And I think I've said the same line, and I don't mean to participate in your memes on demand, your memes on demand here. But so 2 things came up in every conference that I've been at here. And one is a medical condition called shiny object syndrome. And the other medical condition is working groupitis. And these 2 things remain the connective tissue from when I first started in this space, better part of 10 years ago, to today. We eat ourselves by not being able to simplify what we're working on, build business models and economic fabric that can help us all be successful in the supply side, on the consulting side, on the end user side. We have this natural predisposition to move on to the next big thing before we've solved today's problem. So my journey to where I'm at right now, I started about 10 years ago when nobody was testing for vulnerabilities in an intelligent way. So I wanted to solve a testing problem, find vulnerabilities in these systems. We did that. Right away we faced, well, you're not testing every protocol. You're not testing deep enough. Every reason why this wasn't perfect. So we said, yeah, enough. We'll keep doing that. We put a testing platform out there. Then we wanted to have some benchmark across companies. How do you certify and compare product A's robustness, even of just the stack implementation versus product company B? Put a certification out there. It wasn't perfect. Then a few years later, we realized we have a people problem. Okay, this whole IT/OT thing. I still don't believe in that. I think it's still just T. But at the end of the day, we still didn't have the right mix of skills and competencies. We put GICSP out there. You're involved in that for months. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't exactly what the industry wanted, but it was something. And now we've got 2,000 people post-certification. So my arc has all been about finding the real core issues and solving them and ignoring the shiny object syndrome and moving on. And what we had in the last 4 years, I ran cybersecurity at Shell globally for our industrial facilities for 4 years. And on the latter part of my 4-year tenure, we realized the technology was moving ahead so fast and the business cases for remote, unmanned, decoupled hardware, software, were so compelling, we decided to bury security into our technology maturation journey, which had a business case behind it and allowed us to continue to sustain through our customer relationship our supplier relationship with GE. So what we did, instead of now going and bolting on to the current estate, the next cool thing that's out there, which is great, I'm sure they're all cool, but this particular infrastructure we're all working with right now doesn't really come easily with us on the journey to software-defined networks, open APIs, that we just can't keep bolting stuff on. So we've kind of ignored doing the next thing and said, well, how are we going to design the new architecture of the future? Let's get that right. use the dollar that I have instead of having a finger in the current pot of fixing legacy systems. I'm going to kind of go all in for the future because I think that's where the business value and benefit's going. So it might be perceived as a little bit like we're ignoring the current problems, and consultants hate that because they have to make money today. But if you don't see any brand of our consulting community about securing the industrial future, it's all about patching, bolting on stuff today. So anyway, that's what we're doing wrong. We're not learning from simplified, collaborative, if we all agree on 5 controls. I said this last conference. I wanted to come back here, 5 controls that we all agree on. Let's all get it done wherever we are and come back and talk about the success of patching, antivirus, that kind of crap.
The challenge is laid down.
Do it.
Again,
Please.
a second time.
Number 2.
Marty.
I know what Tyler's meme's going to be. It's all about T. I can see it now.
All on T.
There's
It's
now
all
an
T.
There's now an ET, by the way. Last conference I was at. Now it's
IoT,
engineering
ET,
and
IT,
technology.
OT.
Silly.
This is a tough question, I think. And if I look back, and we've seen some of that discussed this morning, you've got these highly successful organizations that have invested in the security of their industrial controls environments. You've got vendors who have made similar investments in redesigning things. I think I'm going to put a concept out on the table that says we just haven't reached enough people yet. We just haven't hit that critical mass of saturation where everybody in this environment knows instinctively that security is something that you just have to do, just like safety. So nobody in their right mind walks into any industrial environment without asking, what are the safety procedures, protocols. No company's going to let you into their environment without sitting and watching their 15-minute safety video. You put on the right personal protective equipment and off you go. We have to have that same culture in security. I think that from a governmental standpoint, we've seen certain sectors do really good with culture in the security area. I think the financial sector is probably first and foremost. There's some others that are quick runners-up, I think. So we need to take these individual successes, whether they're Adam's success in this protocol area or Sanford's success, and we need to be able to broadcast them ubiquitously out across the environment or the sector. And so I think that although I really am reluctant as a government guy to go back and talk about information sharing, I actually still think some of it's about information sharing. Because we're still reluctant to report incidents when they happen. I see people gobble up the statistics that we can come out with, right? I'm going to tell you that those statistics are skewed. One of the things you asked me about when we were talking about APT, well, probably one of the reasons that ICS-CERT statistics are leaning towards APT is because that's what we're looking for. So we're looking for that in systems. We're not looking for Conficker that got there because the salesman's USB stick got stuck into the computer. So I think that we're still in this kind of vacuum, quite frankly, where not enough people are openly and honestly sharing what's really happening in their systems in an anonymized fashion that we can all take benefit from it. And I think that we've proven that the mechanisms are there. We can protect the data. We can sanitize the data. I just don't think that we're seeing ubiquitous enough reporting in everything, whether that's reporting of successes and, hey, I did this implementation and it worked really, really well, to reporting of failures that said, hey, we had this ransomware event, we had this, infection event. So.
Okay. Well, let me open up to some ideas and questions and get that. And of course, please join me in asking questions of each other. I buy into what Tyler was saying is we do a very poor job of forecasting forward and saying, how do we secure the future of where things are moving? Yeah. We are so, ICS-Security started, when we started this thing, we used to say 10 to 12 years behind IT security, right? And we got mired in that, of this trying to bring this legacy infrastructure forward. Although it still is necessary in many cases, it's just not sufficient for changing any outcome in the future. So a quick question. I taught a very quick 2-hour seminar on strategic planning, and there was a big focus on understanding trends and forecasting forward, to take a trend and understand what the implication will be to you, not only now, but over the next 18 to 24 months and beyond. And what does that mean for aligning resources and effort? Defining what Tyler said, what are the things that we need to do? Marty's talk, he talked about improper virtual, using virtualization, failures in VLANs or areas, things that he saw. I wouldn't call those necessarily trends, but bring your own devices was a trend, increased use of cloud services out there. I'd add some, and I'd like to hear from each panel member about what you think the most important trends that we should really be thinking about to understand how best to create a better future. I'd say convergence. We've seen safety function converge at the network level now already. Why? It made great business sense to do that. We're starting to see now logical convergence of both safety and control even in a single device. In fact, one manufacturer is pushing that as the future, is that the single controller will have both logic and safety logic on the same controller. Convergence is an important trend, I think, that we're going to need to, just to kick this off, for us to struggle with and understand as an implication for getting a more resilient system out of the end. Panel members' thoughts, other trends that we really need to tackle to get a better future.
I'm going to stand up, and when you were saying what is the future, before you said the word convergence came to my mind, because you can't stop it. You can't stop the use of iPads, you can't stop the use of phones, you can't stop the business from saying, I want to know data points on a turbine that's running on the side of an aircraft at 38,000 feet. So that's going to happen, whether we want it to happen, we don't want it to happen, secured, not secured. And so I think it goes back to, Tyler summed it up well, if you already know what's going to be happening going forward, why don't you focus on getting the core, what you need done in that area, and don't worry about the edges of that bell curve. I mean, SDN, I think, is the future for this industry as well as everything else, whether you like it or not. It's coming, it's going to show up. And you can sit there and say, well, they don't have enough security, or they don't have this, or they don't have that. It's still coming. And so I think we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Therein lies the rub for me, is that if we agree with that, and our position would be there's a very attractive business case for removing the hardware-software integration, decoupling that model, and making our vendors unhappy with the margin sales that they get today. But at the end of the day, we have struggled with a resourcing and a skills gap for just today's problem. We only have, let's say, 10 people, and we only have $1 to spend. I don't think we can effectively do both. It's hard for me to say that because everybody wants to, and I think we have to in some respects. But if we don't challenge ourselves now to kind of think binary, either we go in for the future and not be the people that probably the three of us here at least complained about 10 years ago, all those PLC engineers, they forgot to put security into these things, Well, it was good for us from a business perspective, but we yelled at them for not thinking about the future, and here we are today with the exact same migration happening in front of us, a technical estate change that is non-trivial in nature, and yet we're still thinking about secure protocols with the current paradigm. Again, interesting and cool, but it doesn't go with us.
So I think one of the things that we fail to, it's a failure of imagination, is to take the opportunity to, instead of fearing convergence or fearing that additional complexity, is embracing it. And I have to be vendor agnostic, but there's some really interesting technologies, I think, that are starting to emerge that are very tailored for kind of critical infrastructure kind of areas. And that's taking some of these, machine learning algorithms and almost artificial intelligence type of algorithms and turning them back and applying them to our systems. And there's a couple solutions out there, for example, that are mining your entire data historian platform to look for anomalies or forged data so that they can go, oh, by the way, do you know that this signal over here is an exact replica of a signal that we saw 5.5 years ago? That 30-second soundbite was the same. And I think when you think outside the box like that, we can come up with some pretty innovative solutions for this space. But we quite often, failure of imagination. We just don't quite go there.
Right. So I guess the question is, as we think about some of this fertile ground, if you will, areas that if we put our concentration, like Tyler said, and we don't get distracted, we really focused in on 3 or 4 things. Marty, in your talk, you talked about, you're seeing a lack of even monitoring, right, at the network level or the host level within a control system environment. We're having these problems that people don't even know they have. We saw an incident in nuclear power plants, right? A German nuclear power plant operator who turned around and finds Ramit and Configure that had infected their systems at least 6 years ago, right? When they go to do a modernization upgrade, they find the infection for the very first time. Why? Because they were just doing, protections and tiers.
It's the first time they'd actually touched that system
Exactly.
in that 6 years.
In that 6 years, and they find it's infected, and they have to go do that. So the question is, each one of you have hinted and brought up areas of what I would say fertile ground, right? Everything from data-driven predictive systems that can look at the data, if you will, maybe a network historian, host historian model that says, we're seeing some type of anomalies helping you decision support-wise, making you a better decision. Being able to look at fleets of things and learn very quickly to apply it and to fix a problem somewhere by looking at a single machine or a single implementation of something. Other areas would be in decoupling software from hardware, software-defined networks open up a host of opportunities for us in terms of what we could do from a resilience perspective. So what are the major fertile areas? If we were to pick 3 things to focus on, what were the 3 things that this audience ought to go out and think about how they're going to be doing the future of control systems and automation from a resilience and security perspective? And then Tyler, I don't know if you want to bring up things like robotics. I mean, quite honestly, we live in a fixed model. We're used to servers are here, hosts are here, we have PLCs there. We're seeing more and more mobility. Everything from the actual assets themselves, skid-mounted, moving around, individual components, bring your own devices showing up in environments, and robotics now interacting in industrial environments.
So I still think we're narrowing in on the problem as it exists today. So I was at a talk last week where Peter Thiel, basically is an investor, for those of you guys who don't know him, pretty smart guy, says anybody who uses big data, AI, analytics, and cloud and assumes that they can put any of that intelligently on the current infrastructure is a fraud. And this is in front of my CEO, BP CEO, Exxon CEO, ministers from Kuwait and Saudi Aramco, because it's true. Technically, you can't do all these analytics that we sell each other with the systems we have. We either have to clean up the estate, standardize the protocols, the data structures, and then start thinking about the cool, sexy AIs and machine learning, or we just accept that we're going to be in a technical debt state in perpetuity, where our consultants are going to make lots of money by adding another layer of firewalls or anomaly detection. And by the way, anomaly detection for who? I have probably one of the most mature security programs around, and I don't have anybody that can have another thin client application with another bunch of information. There's no role that exists in Shell that can handle any analytics coming from what's on my network. And if that's the case for us, less mature, we're only mature because we have a great PECT and had lots of money, but less mature companies can't do anything with the data they have. Why give them more data?
Art, Rob?
I agree. So one of the challenges that hits me commercially is how do we go back into these environments and sort of standardize the platform so you can manage it more easily? That's one of the ways a cloud guy is going to think, right? Manage the platform, manage the infrastructure, stay in control of it, update it more easily, et cetera. One of the areas of friction that I see is sort of pricing and go-to-market strategy. You go in very heavy-handed, plant by plant, and we see this at GE too. Hopefully we can transform this to some respect. We're still selling hardware. We haven't gotten out of the industrial age, right?
The OpEx.
And so what we need to get into is how do we instrument these platforms that we can sell software and services upon down the road. Not going to make any money on hardware, not going to make any money on servers. It's all going to be on services, analytics, those kind of things. On the analytics side, we're doing some very interesting things. I mean, I'm trying to be a little judicious and not just pitch GE here. We have a program called Digital Ghost, where we took a bunch of researchers into a room, the guys who actually designed the gas turbines, for about 2 weeks, and said, guys, make a list of all the ways someone can just screw this thing up. And you get bonus points for screwing it up in a really catastrophic way. They came up with about 225 different threat cases. And then some of our data scientists developed an algorithm that could account for those or identify these exploits against an asset using existing sensor data. Next step on that is to create self-healing control systems. So how does a control system, once an anomaly is detected, identify that and then accommodate for it by resetting to some sort of baseline standard or safe operating level? So interesting stuff going on there.
Self-healing.
Self-healing, self-attacking.
Very
They're
sexy.
two sides of the coin. It's like defense and depth, defense and offense. Art, you talked about regulation. And so Tyler, everyone we're talking about and saying is just let's boldly go to a new place and change the game. Can we? I mean, regulation is something that, as you know, is mired in our understanding of the past. We write it down in black and white and say, now everyone go out and do these things. And typically it's a big parachute. It ends up slowing us down. It doesn't recognize all of these model changes. Are you seeing that?
Well,
I'm seeing that today.
I think it goes to the other missing element that we haven't talked about, which is people. And yesterday in your strategy summit, you actually called me on, that the financial services sector seems to kind of have a handle on this security thing. And I agree, because the CEO of all these big banks, the entire time he's been in banking, money has been a digital construct. I mean, in today's world of banking, they stopped putting stuff out at counters decades ago. It's all about, digital things. And so they've grown up digital in their industry, and they understand that. And so this is part of their culture. Whereas I'm in South Texas at a gas well, and the guy goes, what do we need security for? We're drilling gas, and their mindset is not onto all this new cool, shiny object stuff yet. Well, when you go to Washington, D.C. and you say we need to regulate, they think about, well, maybe we should regulate against viruses or spam, or we hear about this in the news.
Right.
So until the people writing regulations, and that also includes inside companies, until they really get a handle on how all this works, that business case element, we're going to be shackled by someone that writes a really well-meaning idea that if you change a line of code on an aircraft anywhere on any of their systems, until it's requalified for flight on all of them, none of them fly, which seems like a great idea, then we stop flying. And we stop doing these things. So the regulation problem is a big piece, people understanding problem, and it's going to take time to grow them.
Remember, for we're ripping or replacing 4 regulations, for any new regulations, so maybe we have a chance to make the change here in the United States.
Go ahead, real quick. Just one of the issues that I struggle with too is data sufficiency around attribution. Yeah. How do you create actuary models and actually work to solve problems that you have out there? Right. Life insurance, pretty safe bet somebody knows when I'm going to keel over and how much to charge me for it, right? But not so with an exploit on an industrial control system. Banking, they've been tested a little bit, so there's a little more data there.
So drivers for change, let me ask you, panel members, do you think insurance will become a big driver? I've seen big changes in real property insurance coverage. I've seen taking on risk and exposure where the insurance companies are realizing some of these are systemic risks. So there's residual exposure. Is that going to be a big driver? Do you think insurance companies will help drive big technology decisions in the future?
Back on that one, but just to answer, I think so, but we thought so 10 years ago. Right. I think one of the guys speaking tomorrow, we used to work as a cyber czar after Perry Peterson, and he tried this. The math is very difficult to get right, and the risk associated with funding bad math from an insurance perspective is very high. Mm-hmm. So again, 10 years hasn't been solved by the smartest people I'm aware of. Is it something we can count on going forward? But back to the people problem. Speaking around saying something is a problem and doing something about it. We talk about people as an issue, okay? One of our problems in Shell is that we wanted to endorse and help with the GICSP to help augment our workflow, because we were getting very crappy people from consultants talking about things they didn't understand. What we didn't also get is diversity in that workforce.
Right.
And part of our initiative was to get women into the GICSP.
Right.
And I don't mean to come down on you at all, but there's no women speakers here at all. And millennials, we also wanted to have more younger people involved.
I was excited about our program, now I'm depressed.
And there's no 20-year-olds. I counted anybody who's around 20. I don't see any, maybe I missed you. But those are two things we can all probably agree are going to contribute to a future problem. Can we just solve it and get it done with? 5 women speakers next year.
You're right.
So Mike, I think I want to comment on the insurance thing, and I agree, Tyler.
We're going to ignore the diversity problem.
We haven't made the progress, right?
It's a problem.
I think we have to get to the point where the insurance underwriting industry understands, right? I mean, that's part of, if you map that back to the information sharing problem,
right.
I think it's a data problem. There isn't enough, good, sound evidence that they can build the actuarial data off of. But I don't think that as a CEO you can make the decision whether you're going to self-insure and accept that risk yourself or whether you're going to farm it out until you understand that price point.
Right.
And we just haven't got there yet. But I believe that, that is one of the drivers that drives things like regulation. It drives the way that all of this works is the money, right? Where's the equation that tells you what this event cost you?
I think the market, will be one of the big pushes. Okay, let's go to lightning round. So we got lots of questions, and we've got a great panel here. So let's rip through this, and let's not shy away from things. I know Tyler won't. If the panel, and maybe one answer for each one of you, if the panel could get an ICS vendor to do 3 items to improve security, what are the 3 points? So maybe each of you pick one, and we'll come up with a list of 3. What are the things you should ask? Yes, sir, Marty.
Document your protocols and let's stop hiding behind proprietary
past.
protocols.
That's the
no,
past,
it's not.
Marty.
It's still
Okay.
the same. You still go and ask your favorite vendor to explain their protocol to you.
Okay, document sessions, interactions, and those type of things. Tyler, one thing.
Update your patches, give me a service that monetizes and values that security control, irrespective of it being patches, end users, system integrators, operators, and suppliers on one thing.
Very good. Rob, what would you tell yourself?
Very similar.
When you get up in the
clean
mirror.
You didn't even give me that's the past. Anyway.
Clean up and maintain HMI hosts, and also be aware of what the heck's even running in the environment.
Okay, so you're saying secure configurations and an understanding of the behavior of the system. Turn that, which is kind of what Marty was saying. Turn over what we should expect for behaviors of the system. Okay, Art?
Make them updatable and actually do that. It goes back to Tyler's patching thing. Tired of seeing Windows 4.0.
Man, we're mired in the past. So okay, Tyler, you're gonna come back, spend time with the Tyler audience tonight, and we're gonna think up great things for the future. All right, many organizations manage threats in separate silos, right? They have IT groups, and by the way, I have a quote for you, Tyler. I think what you really meant to say was there's no I or O in team. Anyway, so IT, OT, you have compliance groups, you have physical and cybersecurity. They're all separate. Do you see the need in modern organizations of converged programs or matrix organizations that will tackle operational risk as a whole? Yes or no?
Matrix, absolutely yes.
In a lightning round, yes.
Yes.
Yes, except converged does not mean identical.
Okay, convergence. So there needs to be expertise, but you need to matrix this. And there better be women there, and there better be young.
The whole point, though, is that you have to make the right skill set available to the right piece of the organization, and we don't do that today.
Okay. Best security program I've ever seen added a large, treated security as a layer of enterprise architecture. Do you guys agree? Do you see to expect clear integration of security into architecture models, basically? Or is that just too old school? Is that yesterday? Software-defined networks?
Yeah,
Kind of might be
in
revolutionary.
our view of the new world, segmentation as a control, which exists in every standard, in every framework, is no longer applied in the same way writ large. It just does not go forward. So architecture is absolutely key.
This is the lightning
Yes.
round.
Yes. That's okay.
I'll take that back and I'll put it towards the security and safety culture. I think that if you look into that question, we have to get to the point where security is thought of just like safety.
Part of the safety
All the
process.
time. No, so it's not architecture, it's everything.
Into the engineering and design. You talked about doing PHA and HAZOPs. That's really tough. You've unbounded the problem.
Amazing how lightning this is.
Yeah. Well, remember, we don't have a lot of electricity in the room, as you guys know with your laptops. But okay, all right. All right. Well,
Yes to architecture, but even a bigger yes to culture.
okay.
Culture really trumps everything.
Culture trumps everything. So that's the key to leadership. Rob?
One of the strongest security cultures I've seen is at Netflix, and by design, they handle almost all their security through monitoring alone.
I was still mad at Netflix for splitting the two costs up. I can't
You like
accept
the
that.
discs in
Okay,
the mail?
what are some examples of displacing cyber with discrete electronics and the most critical safety control settings? I wrote a paper with Andy Bachman's in the audience here today called A Case for Simplicity. Oh my God, I thought the world fell on me when people were like, you're talking about going back to analog, which I was not. I used a new term called 21st century non-programmable digital devices. But give us some examples. What do you mean, Marty? Because even I had to come up invent new terms for that concept.
I don't think there's that many concrete examples of people that have done that, because they're trying to take cyber off the table.
Yeah.
But I take it all back to, it's the big red button. It's the button on the wall that if you push it, you're in a world of hurt, but you want that thing to work when you push it.
I mean, Tyler, is this something that's important? Last line of defense? conceptually you say, nope, doesn't support business models, keep going
No,
forward?
I like it. I like
Like
it,
it.
but it's a new subject. It requires new thinking. I'd really like us to focus on what we can do today, get it done, and move on to something more
Very good.
interesting.
Although in some new digital nuclear power plant designs, full digital safety systems and the recognition that separation isn't going to do it for us anymore, there's been some thinking in that domain. That was at least an application example of saying maybe the fallback rod control for safe shutdown is an important,
Is a rope?
yeah, instead of using a general purpose controller, even though it's gone through some good testing regimes that Tyler helped bring into the world.
Millennials will want an app to lower the rods.
Well, there is a whole new culture of people coming in, and I think with it, I hope it'll usher in diversity. So, common message is simplify, but lots of risk comes from very cheap, simple, insecure technologies. We'll see that with IoT applications and sensors and instruments. How do we effectively move to a cheap, simple, secure IoT future? Any quick answers?
We don't know. If anyone tells you what that IoT future looks like, it's not been invented yet. They're still trying to put the old paradigm on. So I think it would be great to have people on the Open Automation Forum security track. There's two of us,
Yeah.
but
One of the
two of
big-
us with big checkbooks on big companies that are facing this problem. So if you want to sell stuff to us,
They could drive some
One of
change.
the big ubiquitous IoT issues, I think, is that by the time the thing hits the market, they stop making it. They're making the next one, right? I mean, so they make 100,000 or 200,000 of these things, they retool and move on, and it hasn't even hit the sales stream yet. And so we're seeing just egregious, hard-coded passwords and telnet. Your go home and try to telnet into your Blu-ray player.
Yeah, but
It'll probably
so
work.
that's one of these holdback things, right? So if ever you spend any time working with firmware and you look at the firmware supply chain, IoT is this. It's, I'm going to build a device for the market in 6 months. I'm going to reach back 6 years ago and grab a copy of firmware that was created 6 years ago, and that's what I'm implementing in that device. I mean, and there's no accountability, meaning even if there is a problem, there's no way to go back, and get the folks who worked on it to go fix it. And there's no interest in it or business model in doing that.
I'll poke one of Tyler's old subjects and say that this is an area that's ripe for device certification type of conversation. Minimal security conformance standards, right? Otherwise, you don't get a sticker that says you're allowed to plug it in the wall.
So there's lots of efforts happening. TUV and other people who have done safety in traditional areas are starting to bring their regimes to bear. ISA Secure exists. Is it going to work? I mean, do you think the environment is going to adopt that?
So go back to the SAN security controls, take the top 20, narrow them down to top 5 for IoT, and then tell people if it doesn't meet and pass these 5 conformance tests for these 5 things, it doesn't get an Ethernet jack
Maybe this
or
is
an
one of the
antenna.
3 things we need to get done. Maybe
make sure the audience goes home to their companies and preaches that same message. Because if you're a GE or you're Shell, you have multiple suppliers and people telling you different things. So if there's 3 for one segment of the environment and 50 for another, that's an expensive proposition for us to manage. You can't have Shell telling you we want 5 things, and BP telling you want 10.
And I think it's real important to realize, much like we talked about convergence between IT, OT, and maybe ET, whatever that's going to be, IoT is coming whether we like it or not. And so
it's here.
we have to find a way through the culture of, we can't adopt this, we can't put it into our plants, we can't plug them in because we don't trust them. The same way, we'll always find new ways to hurt people in a refinery. Somehow that happens, but yet we find better ways of making certain that we don't hurt people. I mean, safety today is way better than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
That's cultural. We have to get the culture to drive
well,
this.
Let's talk about people, because culture, this will be the last question, then we'll go into closing comments about 30, 40 seconds each. Who should lead the ICS security team? Where should it sit? When you're looking at assets, should it be technology leaders like CIO, CTO? Should it be plant manager? Should it be ICS? Do we use this new unicorn and say there's an ICS security director? Tyler, you fit that bill. You were in that role. What is the success factor to that winning team? And obviously, Tyler, you've already brought up the idea, and you're absolutely right. SANS has been working very hard the last couple of years to try to tackle the diversity problem, bringing new minds in, different perspectives, adding to the teams that exist, not just using kind of the same old, accepting the today as the norm. So how do we answer that question? Where does it report? How is it best to lead it, and what type of people?
You want me to go first since I'm on the end?
Absolutely.
So I would say number one, you need a champion. So I don't necessarily think it matters, where it sits, but it has to report at a high level into the organization because these are significant decisions that affect, the C-suite's bottom line. I think then once you have that champion, you have to matrix in a variety of skill sets. I don't think you can do it with just IT or just OT or even if you had ET beam in. I think that you have to be flexible enough to bring the right people to the table to inform that individual, he or she, in that championship position. And I think it's also different in different sectors or segments. I mean, a vendor community, I think, is going to attack it different. That's a manufacturing sort of organization than, a oil and gas giant.
Yep. Tyler, big complex company, upstream, midstream, downstream.
I think it's a sequence problem. So governance is your first problem, deal with that, and don't do anything else until you get it established. And we had a very complex model to deal with. So our refining business was driven by IT. Our upstream was driven by engineering. It doesn't really matter. It reports up to the same place eventually. And we didn't really have a top-down approach. We just said document your governance structure, then look at it and figure out how you're going to sustain and cost this out. Because these people who you just put onto a piece of paper as part of a responsibility matrix don't have it in their budget, don't have it in their training, don't have it in their skills. So figure out that, operationalize that, integrate it wherever you need to, but define it, run it, and then start bolting on some other
So that's
stuff.
big enterprise buy-in. Rob, real quick, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I've seen it done successfully operationally to date. So no new roles. IT working with the OT operators. Because the OT guy is, if you're respectful, he's going to tell you what can be updated when and what kind of changes can be made when. And they're probably going to err, what's that?
Or she.
Yeah, or she, or a millennial will tell you when you can or cannot update something.
Well, a millennial will do it till 3 o'clock, and then they have to go home. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.